I want to let you know that the United States is going to make a contribution of $10 billion to the Board of Peace. Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, UAE, Morocco, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Uzbekistan, and Kuwait have all contributed more than $7 billion. And the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Assistance is raising $2 billion for the support of Gaza. Together we can achieve the dream of bringing lasting harmony to a region tortured by centuries of war.
And that's President Trump yesterday at the first official Board of Peace meeting on the future of Gaza and maintaining Middle East peace. 9 member countries contributed nearly $7 billion to the pledge, along with additional troops to stabilize Gaza and disarm Hamas. Joining me now is former State Department Senior Advisor Christian Whiton. Christian, welcome. Good to see you. Your reaction to yesterday's meeting?
Good morning, Maria. Well, it's a big deal. You know, the Board of Peace specifically has been sort of described as not meant to replace the United Nations, but you can see in its effectiveness what it's done or what it appears to be doing, which is moving the ball forward in an actual real-world accomplishment, not just holding a meeting for the sake of a meeting, but getting those countries that the president named to offer up $7 billion on contingency, and the United States would chip in 10 potentially, but also the important question of who disarms Hamas, that it might be a combination of Indonesian troops and U.S. sort of intelligence and command. So finally, the administration is answering all of these questions about Gaza using a new alliance. And if you look at what the G7 was created to do, it was created in the chaos of the 70s after the collapse of the Bretton Woods economic system to get people together who could actually do things, who had similar values and money. And this is what Trump has done. Basically, this, you might be looking at the future G7 to replace the old G7, which is sort of yesterday's news.
Well, I mean, look, it's an easy replacement for the UN when you think about some of the things the UN has done. I mean, just last week, what did they name Iran as the vice chair of a committee overseeing women's rights? I mean, really? Yeah,
well, I'm surprised they don't make him. Yeah, they'll probably make him head of the Human Rights Council. I mean, why not? This is, they you know, typically put countries like China and others on that council. It's a joke of an organization that's never lived up to its ideals.
Well, the president extending a Board of Peace invitation, though, to 2 of America's largest adversaries. That was interesting. Watch this.
I know that China is going to be involved, and I think Russia is going to be involved. I think they will be. I want to have everybody, get all sides, because it doesn't help when you have all sides with one ideology. You have to have everybody together for this.
Certainly a good way to instill peace by forcing adversaries to join the Board of Peace. Christian, your reaction?
Yeah, I think this is classic Trump, where it's good cop, bad cop, and this is the good cop part. We're seeing this with preparations for the summit with Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, in April, where he has made some, I don't call them compromises, but at least trying to meet China halfway on some things, you know, some H-20 chips from NVIDIA, and potentially, even though Trump has given Taiwan more arms or approved more arms sales than any president in history and done more for Taiwan than anyone since Eisenhower, potentially delaying the announcement of future arms sales in order to get to yes on that. That's China. But with Russia, I don't see them pulling out their checkbook anytime soon. But the idea is we don't have permanent enemies. And if there are areas where we can cooperate, then why not?
Let's talk about Iran. The president has set a new timeline for Iran to make a nuclear deal with the United States. And we're all wondering if the president is going to make a move even this weekend. Watch this.
No. What is the goal if there is a U.S. military?
Well, we're going to make a deal, or we're going to get a deal one way or the other.
Then we is give them a deadline firm to make a deal?
I would think that would be enough time, 10, 15 days, pretty much maximum.
Christian, what are your thoughts here? Secretary of State Marco Rubio is headed to Israel next week to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu on the status of the ongoing nuclear talks. But look, the armada is growing. We've got major carriers in the air and at sea. The president could strike at any moment, and he could decide to do so over the weekend as the U.S. is building up those air and naval assets in the region.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the case. I hope it's not, but I do think that war might be coming just because I think the Iranians are being duplicitous here. They have such an easy way out. The administration is talking to them about their nuclear program, about their ballistic missile program, about their malign activities all across the Middle East, around the world even, and also just their human rights atrocities. But I think if Iran came in from the cold and cut a deal on nuclear weapons, and literally all they have to do, all their centrifuges are probably already destroyed or ruined, but if there are any left, just line them up and run a bulldozer and then give up its supposed right to enrich uranium. They only have one electricity producing reactor in that whole country, and they have a deal with the Russians to supply their fuel and to take their expended fuel. They do not need to enrich. The only reason they wanted to enrichment is to have a nuclear weapons program. That's the only reason they enriched HEU, highly enriched uranium, up to 60%. That's way above what you would use for a reactor. So either they agree or I think the president will act. I think he sort of has to act, having come up to the brink in this manner. And oil prices, I should add, oil prices do not reflect the fact that a fifth of the world's oil, or at least liquid petroleum, flows through the Strait of Hormuz and would be put at risk during a conflict.
Well, it's interesting. You know, you had the Munich Security Conference last weekend, and of course, Iran, China, among the leading headlines coming out of that. Of course, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the Democrats attending this year's conference. Her performance was one of the big talkers after that. Watch this.
Would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan?
You know, I think that this is such a, I think that this is of course a very longstanding policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point. And we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic research and our global positions to avoid any such confrontation.
Well, everybody's wondering why she even went, certainly exposing herself with that word salad. But the president yesterday reacted. Watch this.
When you see the representatives there, like Gavin Newsom, he didn't know what he was doing. They didn't even know why. He didn't know why he was there. Or AOC, she was unable to answer a simple question. And she could have said, well, I'm studying it, and I'll report back to you next week. You know, you can get away with that. But she just went, it's actually, I think it could be a career-ending answer, because for 25 years, anybody running against her, I think, Susie, is going to use that little piece of stuff. It was not good.
What do you think, Christian? Your reaction?
Yeah, I think Trump nailed it in the sense that it was painful. I'm dating myself. It reminded me of Chevy Chase buying airtime in Three Amigos. But the fact that she doesn't know everything about Taiwan policy is okay. The fact that as a politician at her level, she didn't have a mechanism to pivot onto something that she could talk about. Well, I don't know the specifics about that. I'm still learning. But I think it's very important that the United States try and secure peace in the Western Pacific, blah, blah, blah. It really questions whether she can work at that top level, because I do think Democrats want to let off a primal scream in 28. The prediction markets say that Gavin Newsom is the leader, but I think they may want someone crazier, and that was, she's the best option. So, you know, we'll see.
Tiana, jump in here. I think she wanted to run for president. I don't know after that what that says about her knowledge of foreign affairs.
Yeah, you know, doing the world peace like Trump has done, a little easier said than done, right? I'm curious about her attempt to attack Marco Rubio, who was incredibly well received in Munich, trying to strike a balance between telling Europe, this is what we need you to do, but we want to be an alliance. We have shared history. She attacks him for that. If you are a European looking to restore the American-Europe alliance, is that comforting, knowing that the left could wind up being also anti-transatlantic alliance?
Real quick, Christian.
Yeah, well, we expect the left-wing Europeans and the left-wing German government who funded the conference to be anti-American. It's just a little odd for Americans to take the spotlight in that role. Democrats just think it's another chance to take a pot shot at Trump, which is unfortunate.
All right, Christian, great to talk with you. Thank you. We'll see you soon. Christian Whiton, stay with us. We'll be right back.